Hello, welcome to episode 16 of the Hybrid Ministries Tech Forum. If you're playing this back at a later time, welcome. If you're live with us on Zoom or YouTube, we'll be taking your questions and comments on our Discord. There's a category named Live Show with channels under it named Live Questions and Live Chat. We don't use Zoom's chat or QA features, question and answer features, except here is the link for the zip cord, Discord, should you want to join. So let me put that in here right now.
I like zip cord better.
Yeah, right? That would be great, zip cord. So if you want to invite other people to come and join the show, you can find the Zoom and Discord registration information on our Facebook page. If you're live with us on Zoom, you can stick around after we're done and participate in the after show, where we'll have a casual conversation and Q&A with open mics. So this is a growing international and multi-faith community that is all of you, of course, representing congregations of all sizes. And at this technical level, denominations are transparent. We all want to communicate with our communities and do it as effectively as we can. And that's why we're here, to help each other up our game. And we are but one in a related set of communities. Leo on our panel, who is not here tonight because he was hosted two other panel discussions today, hosts a show on Sunday afternoons at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. It's as technical as we are here, more so, less so, but has a particular focus on Jewish worship. And there are several other technically oriented shows that I and some other of our panelists contribute to and appear on, and they're dedicated to various media production technologies. So you can look for links to these shows in our Discord under related shows. And there's more. We have some training opportunities for you. Audio training continues on Monday afternoons at 3 p.m. and with Mark Plukas, and Mark can tell us what he has planned coming up.
I think this week we're going to discuss alternative mixing options. For example, using a DSP, simple versus performance modes for mixing systems to help people automate their mixing rather than having someone pushing the knobs constantly. There's a lot you can do to simplify things by using a dedicated device that does it for you.
Oh, yeah, that's big time. I mean, ways to make a series of steps come down to one button push, or a bunch of complex things, or menus, that items that are buried in menus, bring them right up to a button on a desktop. That's really valuable. Thanks. Looking forward to that. And Joanna is offering sound editing and mixing training in Audacity. Tell us how that's going.
Tuesdays at 3, and it's really just about where people are at that come to that meeting, and I kind of meet them where they're at. I've covered recording, I've covered editing, I've covered post-production. I'll cover whatever people need. It's never a big class, so if I have more than 3 people, then I'll have to really figure it out. Mark, are you admitting people? Because there's 8 people in the waiting room.
Not at the moment. I had to step away.
Oh, sorry.
All right.
Okay.
I just hit him.
Before we move on, Marty, I just wanted to add in, we have one other cross promotion to talk about. Reverend Kim DeBooth does an Art of Meaning, a worship arts training. You can find that on her website, artofmeaning.org. And that's definitely talks more about how to make the transition to hybrid worship from the worship perspective as opposed from the technical perspective.
All right. All good. All good. Well, it's these interactive engagement opportunities on Discord and on our post show and in these training classes. It really makes these communities work. Did any of us ever think that there would be an international community of church tech geeks like this? I mean, this is pretty amazing. I've been doing church sound for production for more than 10 years, and some of us more than that. And, what opportunities did we have to meet with other church tech people from all over the world. This is great. So check out the Discord, check out the discussions, the information sharing, the Q&A with each other and with the panelists. It's there all week long. And you'll also find agendas for future shows, links to find past show recordings, and other special announcements. So today, before we get to today, I want to thank all of our panelists. We have Joanna Lovell from Pennsylvania, Jay Paul in Maryland, Mark Plukas in Massachusetts, and Robert McKinnon in Florida. And you know what? I know that there are a lot of other people out there who are watching today, and maybe people that you know who aren't watching, that are just as capable of answering questions and providing information and sharing the information that they have. So everybody is welcome to come on the panel and share what you have, share your gifts, share your information. All you need to do is get here an hour early on Thursdays at 6 o'clock, between 6 and 6:30, and we'll be happy to indoctrinate you onto the panel. And so during the show, attendee microphones will be muted. Questions go into the Discord. Comments can go into the comments section of the Discord. We read all of them and we will get to them. And just don't bother putting them into the Zoom chat because we don't really pay attention to that. So today we're talking about hearing. What? And how we can better serve everybody in our congregations, including those people who have hearing challenges, because that's a lot of people, as we'll find out. And I think I can safely say that most of us grew up on rock and roll and have been to some really loud shows. And some of us work in noisy or loud places, and some of us are just plain old getting older. Some of us, anyway. And so, let's dive into this. We have a lot to learn about the various hearing assistance system options that are available to us. So, Joanna, what do you have to tell us?
I've got some information for people. And I just made a note to myself to discuss closed captioning at the end, because that's another way to include the people from afar that are having issues as well. Why do we need to comply with the ADA laws? Because we should, because it's best practices, because it's become a standard. It's really quite important. My own connection to people with disabilities comes from the kids that I've raised. 2 of them have invisible disabilities. I also became an occupational therapist to try to make a difference in those lives of people with disabilities. And I myself have a visual disability that I don't talk about very often. And I've developed a tinnitus from a concussion that I'm not too happy with. So it is extremely important that we try to make accommodations for people who need hearing assistance. We make accommodations for everybody. That's why those laws are in place. And if you can go to the next slide, Jay. So I want to say that this is not a presentation that represents one manufacturer. There's a lot of manufacturers out there that make these systems. Williams Sound, Sennheiser, and Listen Technologies are just among the few that do that. And so, but I personally have more knowledge of Listen Technologies, since that is a brand that I used to sell at a previous job. So that's kind of where my source of information comes from, those trainings. But I would also like to talk about how the ADA came into being. Go ahead to the next slide. I have a recommendation to watch a movie called Crip Camp. Now, not Crip as in the gang, Crip as in cripple, because when this camp happened back in, I guess it's the 70s, the 60s and the 70s, that's how crippled people used to refer to themselves, as Crip, before we became very conscious of the language that we use to refer to people with disabilities. So this movie is about that run-up to the writing of the ADA legislation, and I myself learned a whole lot, since in 1985, I was just, a self-absorbed teenager, like we all are, not paying attention to anybody else's needs. but the people with disabilities community had been fed up with not being included. There were no ramps on sidewalks. There were no lifts on buses. There was no accessibility to schooling. And it was just really past time to make some inclusive legislation. Go ahead to the next slide. It's a quote from Denise Scherer Jacobson, who happens to be one of the people who demonstrated at the lead up around 1985. You can read what it says. It was a wonderful achievement, but it was only the tip of the iceberg, because you can pass a law, but until you change society's attitudes, that law is not going to mean much. You can go to the next one. And that is from Judith Heumann, who happens to be probably one of the most prolific leaders of that kind of revolution of people with disabilities. I like what she says here. If I have to feel thankful for an accessible bathroom, when am I ever going to be equal in the community? I will be sharing this presentation with anybody who wants it. I think maybe we could even put it onto the Discord. So there are a lot of links in here that I'm not going to go to. But if you wanted to watch Judith's TED Talk about her disability from polio as a child in the 50s, it's quite eye-opening. The pressures that she had to go through, the things that she had to get past in order to become a teacher is quite inspiring. Go ahead, Jay. So the law as it was written was not well supported at all. Businesses did not want to comply. Religious organizations did not want to comply. Everyone thought it was just going to be too difficult. And now religious organizations are one of the biggest adopters, despite not being required in the actual law, which I don't know if anybody wants to chime in about this. We had a discussion in the pre-show about the actual law. Does anyone want to say, Jay or Marty, expound on that?
Well, the ADA does provide an exception for facilities that are owned or controlled by religious organizations, so that they, don't actually have to comply with the hearing assistance part of the ADA law. It's very specific about that.
Right. But if the same facility is used as a rental and offered to the public as a rental,
it's still owned or controlled by the religious organization, so they would technically be exempt. However, I'm sure you have another bit of information about that.
Are you setting me up for something? I don't know what you're setting me up for.
Well, as a matter of fact, even though they're exempt, religious organizations, houses of worship, actually have the highest compliance rate of any other market segment.
I did say that. I said they're the biggest adopters. That means, they have the highest compliance. Exactly. So there's been a shift in that society's attitudes that is, I think, led especially by Unitarian Universalists, right? Inclusion for all is, one of our mantras. So we've absolutely led the way to changing those attitudes towards people with disabilities and welcoming everyone. I spoke a little bit about that movie that talks about those demonstrations that happened when I wasn't paying attention. They literally stopped traffic on Madison Avenue. 50 disabled people stopped traffic to get some attention. They also occupied City Hall for days at a time, and people put their lives on the line, stopped with their caregivers, stopped their medications, and just sat in City Hall until someone listened to them. They were fierce and really needing to have this legislation. Took 4 years to get from the original writing of the legislation in '86 to having it signed into law by George H.W. Bush in 1990. And it has been amended in 2008. There's been some amendments to the law. I'm not actually sure what those amendments were. If anyone else knows, I would be glad to talk about that. But it is continually being looked at and updated. The culmination of all of those demonstrations was something called the Capitol Crawl. And I have a picture on the next slide. This is when people with disabilities descended on Washington, D.C., and decided to leave their wheelchairs and their crutches and all of their assisted equipment at the bottom of the Capitol steps and crawl up the Capitol steps. And it was a very powerful demonstration. The law was signed into effect pretty soon after this. It's okay. Talk a little bit about the prevalence. I think it's the highest, I want to say, out of all the disabilities, visual, physical, it's the highest prevalence of disability, hearing loss. 1 in 8 people over the age of 12 has hearing loss in both ears. Approximately 15% of American adults age 18 and over report some trouble hearing. Age is the strongest predictor of hearing loss among adults aged 20 to 69, with the greatest amount of hearing loss in the 60 to 69 age group. And about 28.8 million U.S. adults could benefit from using hearing aids. But they really do choose not to. And that's kind of what my point was, that I don't know about you, but I have a very stubborn 90-year-old mother who refuses to say that she needs a hearing aid. And I believe that she does. Some people don't do it because of financial reasons. It's quite expensive to get hearing aids. Some people don't do it for the stigma. And that's a shame, because there should not be anyone who doesn't understand that there's still things that they can do to participate in the world. Next slide. Oh, so I was also going to say, so isn't that 15 people out of every 100 people? So you have 100 people in front of you on a Sunday morning. 15 of those people are going to need help hearing, statistically. That's huge. Inclusion for all. This is a link that I got from the UUA website, which has information about listening assistance. The technology that they describe is kind of a little bit out of date. There's some things that they should update, but they do make some really good suggestions about what you can do. And if you ever had a situation where you needed to hire a real American Sign Language interpreter, next slide, you could go to one of these agencies. You could do a Health and Human Services search for your state and find those people pretty quickly. There's a lot of different agencies. They tend to be local. There's like no national agency that lists all the sign language interpreters, but I think that would be a nice thing to do if you had specifically an audience that was deaf. So that is what I wanted to say about that. All right, we can move on to the tech. 4 types of tech. Not this. My point about showing this slide is to ask you not to just get the cheapest system, that these people are worth more of an investment, and that how do I want to put this? Hiring professionals and integrators and designers for your system is really, really important. It's not necessarily up to you to learn all of these technologies. It's up to you to understand them to a certain point so that you can be an educated consumer, an educated end user when you choose your integrator or the person that's going to work with you to integrate these systems. Marty, what did you say before about a motor? You don't have to know to drive a car. You don't have to know how the motor works, right?
Right. You should know you have a motor and what it does, but you don't need to know how to fix it.
Exactly. And when you work with an integrator, you're getting so much more than just the design and the installation. You're getting the service, and you're getting the maintenance schedule for the gear you've purchased. You're getting their discount on the gear that you've purchased. Now, so it's not incumbent upon you to go, hey, I can find this on Amazon for blah, blah, blah money, because your integrator has also included other things like installation and labor and how to maintain that equipment. So that's why they have different costs than you might find on Amazon. But it's just extremely important to work with professionals. This is what they do all the time. And there's no need to pressure yourself to learn all of this technology. But so that's my plug for integration and using an integrator. All right, jumping right in. The first type, infrared. So like your remote control, right? You press the remote, little red light goes to the TV. That's the first type of technology that is used. It is because of the security that is there. It's definitely used in courtrooms, boardrooms, classrooms. And the other pro about that is the receiver can be used in any equipped room without retuning. So you can walk from room to room. And Jay, could you expand a little bit on that technology for me?
Well, infrared is it's transmitting its light. It's contained to the physical space. You need to have your infrared receiver be able to have essentially line of sight connectivity. So it needs to be there can't be a break. So,
Right.
For example, if you're wearing infrared gear and you put your hand in front of the receiver, you will break the audio. You won't have audio. So that touches to the privacy part where it contains the audio to the room. But one of the nice things about IR is that you can take your infrared receiver if you have multiple spaces that have IR. You could use meeting rooms for an example, or classrooms. You could go from room to room, and if somebody's using IR for hearing assistance, when you walk in the room, you're going to pick whatever's transmitted. There's no tuning, no relationship between the receiver and the transmitter that keys a receiver to an IR emitter. So it's an advantage. If you're using IR and can use IR, and you're deploying it in more than one location, it takes away, something that might be, I won't necessarily say a complexity, but it would be like if you have, you're tuning a radio, right? I want to go listen to a different station. Similarly, somebody would be forced to tune, an RF receiver until they found the transmit channel that they wanted to listen to if you were using it in different rooms. So that's what I have to say about that.
And also, you would be wearing a
incidentally-
belt pack, right? Is that what you are wearing physically as the person who needs the hearing assistance?
Well,
is it a belt pack?
you might have there's a lot of stethoscope receivers, so essentially you have we don't have a picture of this at the moment, but it's easily obtainable. To be kind of like a doctor's stethoscope is what it would look like, but then it connects to electronics. The electronics sit on your chest. So as long as you're facing the emitter, or fairly closely, you have that line of sight. If you can see the emitter when you're looking straight ahead, you're going to be able to pick up the IR signal. So that's the basic technology, and there's some other implementations of it besides the stethoscope, but the functionality is always the same.
And Mark, what do you want to say?
Well, incidentally, for the cost conscious, for example, Circle of Friends Coffee House, we have a single pair of Sennheiser headphones and a single infrared transmitter that is not a pro unit, but it works perfectly well for one of our customers that comes in that's needs hearing assistance. So you can use single units that are way more cost effective. You don't have to go into a multi-$1,000 rig if you've got a relatively small house and a limited number of people that need the assistance.
Awesome. Next technology is RF, or radio frequency, and the pros to that are the cost and the ease to install. You can use it outside, and you can allow multiple independent systems or languages, so that's huge as well. No real major drawbacks, and this is definitely one of the most prevalent types of technology in houses of worship. Would you like to add anything about that technology? Anybody? Jay?
So the systems are frequency modulated. It's FM, like FM radio. Well, it is exactly FM, as in FM radio. There are two frequency bands that are dedicated to wireless hearing assistance, so it's protected. So there's a much lower chance of interference with hearing assistance that's in either I think it's 72 or 216 megahertz. And to the tunable part, so where we spoke about IR for a moment, I said, well, it's an advantage. You could walk from one room to another and you're automatically going to be able to hear the audio. It's different with FM wireless in that if you want to have independent systems operating simultaneously, they're going to need to transmit on different frequencies. So it does. So you could say, well, a con is you have to change the channel. It's not a huge negative, and it also affords some positives. So, for example, you could have two transmitters in a system. One transmitter could be just for taking audio from the sound system, whatever you're broadcasting, in terms of speech to the listeners in the sanctuary. You could have a second channel with somebody doing simultaneous interpretation. So if you had people in your sanctuary who needed a second language hearing assistance, it's fairly straightforward for you to do that. And I will say, it's not that you can't do that with infrared systems. You can. It's a little trickier to do than it is to do with FM wireless.
Great. The next slide talks about a secondary type of RF frequency technology. This is predominantly used in group tours, but it has this kind of a neat way to pair the transceivers. The transceiver that the listener wears around their neck needs to be paired with the transceiver of the speaker, and you just turn the Bluetooth pairing on and touch backs to them, and then all of a sudden you're communicating with each other. I would like to, this actually uses 1.9 gigahertz DECT, which I believe is different than those other two frequencies that you talked about, Jay. And if you would be so kind as to forward, I think it's a couple of slides to that example when the person is in the factory. Keep going. Yes, that one. I could come up just a bit.
In this location, we can put a full set where we're all standing right now. Or we're going up side over here. And then these cranes that you see here above us, and that crane over there, they have several different articulating pieces they can spin around, the whole thing can spin around. They can drop actors and sets at 6 feet per second. It's nearly a free fall. They can do some really, really cool things. And so as an actor...
So they're wearing the transceivers around their neck.
To this area.
Is that enough to convey what you needed?
Sure. He walks into a theater, actually. You can keep going.
Private bathrooms, drinking fountain, coat check. Oh, fun, they started painting this. Cool.
Yeah, he walks in a theater.
But also a good rig. It's the sound is awesome. One of the things that we're really, really proud of with the sound is below each of these seats is a thin copper ribbon. So in the other theater, and it is a loop system, which a lot of folks in the neighborhood have not heard about. It's now ADA requirement in New York State. If you use federal funds, you have to put in a loop system.
Thank you. So that's the transceiver. I found this technology to be extremely useful. I was in a training session in a room full of about 12 different tables where we had to rotate from table to table. It was extremely overwhelming for someone like me with ADHD, with anyone with central auditory processing disorder, to try to pay attention to the person that you were supposed to be listening to was near impossible for myself. And this particular technology really, really helped me. So I will give that as a use case for classrooms and training, as well as group tours. Not necessarily so useful for this to be incorporated into the sound system of a house of worship. I'm not exactly sure how you could do that because there was a separate headset microphone that the speaker was wearing. So I guess you can't ask your minister to wear two mics. That's something that I haven't addressed, but I found this particular type of technology very, very useful. That's when if your kiddo has an IEP at school, that's definitely a piece of adaptive equipment that you can ask for. Teachers use that in classrooms all the time. If your kid can't pay attention to the teacher, it's very useful. And it's, like I said, it's portable. It's not like a permanent install kind of a system. All right, moving on. Wi-Fi connectivity. So this is new. This is a newer type technology that's starting to replace some of the others. Very cost effective, offers language interpretation. There's an app that you use on your phone. So anyone who has the app can use their iPhone and plug their own headphones into their phone and wear and hear much better speech intelligibility. And before you say that not everyone's gonna be able to use that app, I will remind you that no one thought they could use Zoom a year ago, and now your grandmother is on Zoom. So it's not a technology that's that difficult to adopt. There are ways that you can actually reuse and recycle old iPhones by taking off all of the other apps on it and just using. So if someone who comes in with hearing needs and they don't have a smartphone, you can hand them an old smartphone where you've cleared off all the apps and just put the Listen Everywhere app on and have them use it that way. Indoors, outdoors, and you can customize the app to your venue. They call it a venue. But if you wanted to you could put an order of service up on a PDF. You could put your logo up, put your church logo on the screen. And I like the fact that you don't need to be wearing a hearing aid that needs to turn to anything. This is for everybody, anyone who needs extra speech intelligibility. And then a couple slides from now is another video about the app. Jay, it's past the picture, I think. Keep going. One more. That's the app. Oh, one more. That's the server. You need a server. Okay, press play.
Listen Everywhere is the first Wi-Fi streaming solution perfect for personal and assistive listening.
This is very
With
much
the
a
free
marketing
iPhone
video.
and
I
Android
apologize.
app, your guests
I'm
can
not
choose to stream audio
condoning
from
listen
multiple
technology.
sources in your venue using their own smartphone or tablet. In a sports bar or restaurant, Listen Everywhere lets your customers choose the game or station they want to hear from the variety of channels broadcast from the stations or local radio. At a conference or house of worship, you can select from the translations provided, enhance audio for those needing assistive listening, or provide audio for overflow or cry rooms, in waiting rooms, casinos, hotels, airports, museums, or tours, anywhere guests need to listen to audio. The simple design of Listen Everywhere makes it incredibly easy to set up and operate. Just connect audio sources and your local area network to the Listen Everywhere servers. Your customers download the Listen Everywhere app from the Apple Store or the Google Play Store and connect to your Wi-Fi network. When the app is opened, your customized welcome message or video is the first thing they see. Using our design specifications, easily add your logo and create, upload, and manage personalized scrolling banners for announcements, advertisements, programs, and more. You can even upload PDFs like menus or event schedules and list all your offers under one tab. Improve the customer experience and set yourself apart from the competition.
Thank you. I'm sorry, that was very marketing heavy with the smile in her voice. You could go ahead and pass that too. But it's a good explanation of how the app is used. And incorporating it into the sound system, and you would need a LAN network. So you need it's got some difficulty setting it up. It would definitely need an IT specialist to make sure you have the right channels to use, and you have the bandwidth to use. It is Wi-Fi dependent, and we all know that that's not always so dependable. But I like the fact that it offers language interpretation, and it's just, again, it's all inclusive. So you don't need to be wearing a hearing aid to need that assistance. It might be someone who has ADHD, or I put CAPD, which is actually, I don't know if I said it before, it's called Central Auditory Processing Disorder. It's someone who can't pay attention to the sound that they're supposed to be listening to for all the extraneous noises. I am definitely one of those people, and it gets worse the older I get. And I think...
Pausing briefly for a
Yes.
question, Sue Royer asked if using Wi-Fi for assisted listening, how much bandwidth needs to be available. In general, not a lot. They tend to be highly compressed signals, so it's not like you're going to suddenly suck up tremendous amounts of bandwidth with the audio streams.
But it does need
I
to be a
think
separate channel, right?
I think it's 64 kilobits per channel. But it does need to have high priority access.
Yes. Yeah.
To not slow down. You don't want to do anything that's going to create additional latency in the data stream.
Yeah, if you're using a managed switch, set the QoS to favor that stream.
And that's why you use an IT professional or an AV professional. Right
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
right? And, okay, I think we're up to induction loops. Is that the next one? Well, this is some information. Again, I'm sharing this Google slide deck with you all. There's links in here. There's more information. Again, I apologize. I'm not promoting Listen Technologies over anybody else's brands. I'm just saying that this is what I know, and I have great contacts at that company, and I think that their customer service is amazing. They do have dealers that they work with. I believe you can also purchase directly from them, but I don't recommend doing that. I recommend going through your integrator. So that they can make sure that they get all the bits and pieces, because there's servers and receivers and things that need to be spec'd that they will do if you inquire and if you have a salesperson. Keep going. Keep going. Hello, doggy.
Listen
Hear that.
everywhere.
See, I hear everything I'm not supposed to. There we go. Induction loop. Marty, take it away.
All right. Well, induction loops. So, first I'd like to say that, I definitely agree. Wi-Fi is the new kid on the block when it comes to hearing assistance systems. It has some tremendous opportunities because it's relatively inexpensive to install. It's inexpensive to purchase. I've installed several, and the Listen Technologies version of Wi-Fi for hearing assistants is unique in its aspect of being able to provide text and documents to everybody. So like the order of service can be delivered by PDF through this app. Text can be provided. Graphics can be provided on the screen. It really takes advantage of that. But it's, it's not easy. The way you get that information into the system is a little bit tricky. So you have to work with somebody to get it up and running, and then figure out the workflow about how you do these things each week. There are other Wi-Fi systems that are audio only that work very well as well. So, talk to somebody. Now, there's one way that it could be easily installed, and that is if you have a Wi-Fi access point, a radio directly connected to the Wi-Fi transmitter, and it's not connected to any other place any other part of your network. It's solely isolated unto itself. And, these are also usable for like drive-in events. If you're going to do a service in your parking lot or something like that, this is a good way of delivering audio to everybody's cars and everybody's phones.
Without risking breaking the law with the wrong RF frequency.
Right, without buying a broadcast FM radio station, right? So
I
there
have
you
the
go.
app that I did download, and the first thing it's asking me to do is just it's a venue scan. So basically, if you walk into a place and you want to know if they have this technology, you hit venue scan, and it comes up. If you have something to connect to, it tells you.
Right, right. So now we go to the oldest technology that's on the books, and that's induction loops. Induction loops have been around for decades and decades. Although if you live in the U.S., it might be new to you because it's only been widely adopted over the last 15 to 20 years. However, it's been wildly popular and even legislatively mandated in Europe for many, many decades, many decades. In fact, almost every place, and it's too bad Leo's not here because he lives in London. He was saying that they don't even think about it anymore because every place has it and every place installs it because it's such a simple system. It's really old technology, and the way it works is that you have a wire that you simply run around the perimeter of a room and connect it to an amplifier that drives the loop, and that gets connected to your sound system or a microphone. And it's not much more complicated than that. It's very basic. It's very original technology, and so you see what's going on here. I'll actually show you in this next slide. What happens when you drive current and voltage through the wire is it creates a magnetic field. And in this image, the yellow part, you can see the loop here is in blue. The loop here is in blue. And the yellow part is the hottest part, the most intense part of the magnetic field. That's where everybody is sitting, is inside the loop. Once you go outside the loop, the magnetic field kind of drops off. Now, so what's the big deal about a magnetic loop? Well, there's a coil of wire inside people's hearing aids called a T-coil, and in the belt pack receiver that you can hand out to people as well. It's called a T-coil, and the magnetic field crosses the coil of wire and is driven. It creates a voltage, very much like a transformer creates a voltage. A loudspeaker and a microphone, they all have a magnet in them that creates a magnetic field, and then a coil of wire that moves in that field. In this case, the coil of wire stands still and the magnetic field moves. Either way, it creates a voltage that creates this audio signal that is replicated from the sound system. And you can hear it directly in your hearing aid. You don't need any other receiver or any other equipment. You don't need headphones. If you don't wear a hearing aid with a T-coil, you can get a belt pack just like any of the other systems, just like the RF system, and plug your earbuds into it or your headphones into it, and it works just the same. So that's, you have this magnetic field. Now, a perimeter loop like this, a single loop of wire around a room, works for a fairly small space and works for rectangular spaces. It does not work well for square spaces. It doesn't work well for large spaces. And so there are different types of arrangements of loops other than a single perimeter. And they can create different patterns of this magnetic field. And that becomes important if you have multiple rooms, or if you want to be careful about how far outside of the room you want your field to be able to be heard, right? And because it's a magnetic field, certain things can be interfered with by it. Like, for instance, electric guitars. Electric guitars have a pickup that is a magnetic pickup, in which case there's a special kind of loop that we would lay called an interference loop, a cancellation loop. And that's the upper right figure here. And you see that in the very right segment, the black part has almost no signal to it. That would be where the stage would be. And so any instruments on the stage would not be affected by the induction loop. Whereas you see on these others, the field can travel pretty far outside the loop, a couple of meters. The one on the bottom here is called a low loss loop, and the field is pretty well contained very close to the perimeter of the loop. So the way that these get constructed is, there's that one loop that goes around the room, but the other thing about that is it's a magnetic field, and magnets are affected by metal. And if you're in a building or that is constructed of steel, if you have structural steel in the building, it's very common in concrete floors to have steel mesh inside the concrete to reinforce it. If you're on an upper level, the building could be constructed out of steel. And all of this steel can absorb the magnetic field and affect how it's effective it is, and it could suck up the signal strength. It could affect the high frequency response. And so there are different ways that we can lay out wires in different patterns to overcome these losses. And so you might have a configuration like this. Now, this is just one piece of wire that is looped around, and you can follow the arrows. It's one loop of wire. It's a single loop. But instead of going just around the perimeter, it crosses the floor, and so it creates smaller zones of magnetic fields that, and because they're smaller zones, we can make them stronger, and it can overcome some of these losses. Now, sometimes we'll actually place a second loop laid on top of the first loop, and that helps it even further. And we can get really crazy if we have a lot of losses in floors and create two loops like this, and now we really have a lot of control over how the signal is going to work. And
I was going to just add, Marty, that if you're constructing a sanctuary, this would be would this be mandatory to do, right? If you have a new building, would it be mandatory?
Anytime that I am called anytime a customer calls me, says they want a loop installed, whether it's a new building or an old building, I go in and I have to take a look at the space. I have to take a look at how it's constructed, and I actually have to go in and take measurements. I lay out a test loop that's calibrated, and I give it certain signals that are specific kinds of specific strengths, specific levels, specific frequencies, and then I take measurements to see what the losses are. And once I have that information, then I can design a loop a loop system that I know is going to overcome those losses, because part of the ADA parameters are that these loops the performance of these loops have to meet certain specifications.
Right.
The magnetic field has to be a certain strength. The frequency response has to be within limits, and the noise floor has to be within limits. The noise floor is another thing that it doesn't come from the loop. It actually comes from electrical appliances in the building. And so we have to make sure that I've been in rooms where I could not put a loop in because I knew it would not meet specifications because of various other noises that were generated by building systems. So
I guess what I was trying to say is the use case is definitely more geared to new spaces, new builds. But it can be retrofitted, but it requires pulling up carpeting and things like that and putting the loop under it.
Right. So
and having a building that you can do it.
So the loop is, it can be a regular round wire, but and it's most typically and it's most effective if it's you put on the floor underneath the final floor covering. So if it's a new building and you're going to have a hardwood floor put down, we would put down our wire before the wood floor goes down. If it's carpeting, we'd put it down just before the carpeting goes down. And the kind of wire we use is a ribbon wire. It is very, very thin. And so if you put it under carpeting, you don't see it, you don't feel it, and it, it works really, really well. It's got a plastic coating over it, so it's not just a piece of thin copper foil. It is copper foil, and it's very thin, but it's got this plastic coating that goes over it that gives it some integral strength.
Right. Do we want to move to that comparative slide with all 4 of the technologies that side by side?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or I think, and also, Jay, there's one more thing to address, which is if you do have a hearing assistance system installed, you also need to comply with the law and put up signage that says you do, that we have an accessible space. And I have pictures of what that signage looks like, and it's just specific to what you have. And here it comes. It should be next. There we go. So, don't forget your signage. And these are things that you'll see in theaters and whatnot. So here's the
There's actually
comparison chart.
specific signs. There are specific signs for induction loops.
It'd be
that
different
has
to
an additional-
specific to
additional
the system that
symbol.
you choose.
Yeah, it's an additional symbol that goes on it.
Right. If you have that particular system. So here's what Marty put together, which is great because these are all the 4 technologies and the kind of the purchase price, the install price, the install difficulty, the type of receiver, multi-channel, secure, hearing aid compatible, and latency. So, Marty, you can want to start with your induction loop there. It is high cost to purchase.
Yes, well, induction loop technology is expensive to purchase and install because there's a lot of materials and a lot of labor and a lot of design time that goes into it. So there is that, but it is the only technology that allows someone with a T-coil equipped hearing aid to not need anything else. They don't need headphones. They don't need a receiver. They don't need anything. They can just walk into a room, turn their T-coil on, and they can hear everything that goes on. It preserves dignity. It preserves self-respect. It's not advertising that I have hearing problems. I need to wear headphones.
Right.
So
Which is something we
does,
hope to overcome anyway, but I understand what you're trying to say.
right. But it's really nice not to have to ask, where can I get a receiver, right? Exactly. And it's also good for the church or the venue because they don't have to inventory as many receivers and keep them working and keep fresh batteries in them. So hearing induction loops have that advantage for the church, the facilities themselves. It is something that does need to be professionally installed and professionally designed. And it is a single channel of audio. It's not a multi-channel system at all. And because of the bleed outside of the loop, so it can bleed to adjacent rooms, but it also bleeds up and down floors. So if you're standing on a floor below or above it, maybe even a couple floors below or above it, you can pick up the audio from the hearing loop. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe you do want to hear that, have that audio be heard in other parts of the facility.
And I'll just take up Wi-Fi, the case for kind of the Wi-Fi. It is the direction that we're all kind of heading. And I guess what I want to say is that's kind of like the most inclusive thing that you can get. And if the argument is that people are not going to want to use an app, it's very easy to do that for them and provide them with their own iPhones. The other thing I wanted to mention is that wearing your own personal headphones is probably going to be a smart thing moving forward with COVID and germs. You would not want to wear someone else's headset. Even if they did wipe it down, and they do wipe down these receivers and the belt packs too, but I personally would not. I would want to be using my own headphones.
Regardless of COVID, I hate wearing someone else's headphones.
Yeah.
And I hate even more being the person that has to maintain a batch of headphones that get handed out.
Yeah.
The beauty of Wi-Fi is people walk in with their own cell phone, their own earbuds or headphones that they bring every week. And if they forget, they almost never forget to bring their cell phone. But if they forget to bring their headphones, you can hand them $9 headphones and say, here, just keep them.
Right, exactly. That's true. That's very
So
true.
it takes a lot of the maintenance issues out of your hands if you use a Wi-Fi/cell phone based system.
Awesome. So addressing the RF system looks like it's a low purchase price. And Wi-Fi is also low as well. I think I saw somebody in the Zoom box talking about, they were using a tour guide system in their church. But the purchase price for RF technology is also quite low. Install price low, install difficulty low. That does not mean you don't want a professional install it. Belt packs, multi-channel, yes, multi-channel, but you have to buy an extra piece of gear or two. It is not secure. So, hey, Jay, would you mind talking about that a little bit?
So when you're discussing security in the context of this, I guess the question is, if you're having holding meetings where you want to provide hearing assistance, or need to provide it to people within the room, but maybe there's some legal reason you can have a closed meeting where you're shielded from I guess sunshine laws or things like that. I mean, I think that's probably far more important in the corporate world than it is in the house of worship world to have secure systems. I don't know if anybody else has any remarks on that, but I think the security part of this is not as critical in when we're talking about houses of worship.
We're trying to get our message out, not keep it from getting out. Although board meetings and stuff.
That's a fair point. But generally speaking, where I would assume that in meetings where people are doing things like talking about personnel issues or finances or things like that, there are probably meetings in smaller spaces with lower attendance, and people who aren't in the room, aren't part of the meeting. They're not able to hear what's going on. And I would say actually that probably makes the case for outside of a room where you have to have private conversations. You should probably be employing a sound masking system to ensure that happens.
Yeah.
So,
and the reminder is that any space where you have an audio system, especially if you're spreading to crying rooms, kitchen, etc.,
right.
Always remember the system has ears.
Zoom microphones are always on. Don't say anything that you would be embarrassed to have to explain away later.
It's very true. It's very true. But it seems that the Wi-Fi system can be encrypted. So if there are people with security concerns over sending their signals out over Wi-Fi, I believe that's a solution there. Infrared cannot leave the room. I thought, Jay, that you spoke about you can go from one space to another.
So no,
that's security.
When I say cannot leave the room.
Oh, I see. The sound can't leave that room.
What you
right.
transmit in the room is contained in the room. You can take your receiver to another similarly equipped room.
It's like what happens in Vegas
what
stays in
infrared
Vegas.
can't do is
infrared is light, so light can't travel through walls.
Right.
And go through windows, though.
It's true.
Well, when we introduce the new gamma ray technology, it will go through the walls.
And 5G is going to take care of everything, right? It's going to transmit straight into us.
So one thing just to mention, and I don't know that it's really that it's probably anything but an edge case. So infrared is no good outdoors. Induction loops are no good outdoors. Wi-Fi is only good outdoors if you have a transmitter outdoors.
Right.
Actually,
potentially it is. But RF, it's fairly simple. An RF transmitter. Those are for hearing assistance. They're generally pretty small, half or quarter rack wide boxes. So you could bring a transmitter out, put it next to a mixing console. or plug in one microphone if you had to do something outdoors and you wanted to accommodate people with a hearing disability in that space.
It's interesting. You just brought to mind the Smithsonian's Folklife Festival that used to happen every year on the Mall in D.C.
Right.
Big outdoor space, many different exhibits. Everybody was under tents and giving lectures and giving talks and music and all kinds of things. Not some place where you can have an RF system because there's no way to hand out receivers and then control getting them back.
Right.
They did set up induction loops in every one of the tents.
Interesting.
Yeah. They actually ran the wire around the tent frame above everybody's head.
Right.
Instead of in the grass.
All right. That's clever.
Yeah.
That is clever. So the next slide is just conclusions. We can go there if you want. Want to just make a couple of final points. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. It's very particular to your needs at your sanctuary. But I want to emphasize that best practices matter, and this absolutely is a subject that matters, and people need to be valued for all of themselves as opposed to just standing out for their disability. I said consider upgrading your system and or hiring an ASL interpreter. Hang your signage. Also, this only addresses the hearing impaired. There's other ADA compliances to pay attention to. Make sure that your bathrooms are handicap accessible. Make sure you have handicap accessible parking spots. All of the things that legislation really took care of that we kind of take for granted these days. But people had to work really hard to get this into law. And I think it's wonderful that we as UUs are on the leading edge of people that are trying to change society's point of view about people with different abilities. We are all about language, right? UUs, we're all about the specific language that we use and using it correctly and making sure people are addressed with respect. But if you're going to talk the talk, I think you need to walk the walk. And then there's one more slide that just says, I'm so bad. Thank you. And there you go.
Wow. Something else that I would add is check your local laws, your local provisions. Something I heard in one of the videos you played, Joanna, was the contractor saying that induction loops are actually mandated in New York State.
Yes. Yeah.
So check your local ordinances. There may be some, others out there who have requirements for one technology or another.
There's also, when you inquire about how many people you can fit in your space, that dictates how many units you need to make available to people. I think when you're dealing with the RF systems, right, they have ways to calculate that. So if you're a venue of 600, you obviously have to offer more body packs and more belt packs to the public. That's another thing to check. I know
if you're a public venue as a religious organization, you can apply the ADA regulations as needed.
Yes,
so if you have 2 people that need it, you can buy for 2 people. If you have 6, you can buy for 6. You don't have to, just because you have a 300-seat house doesn't mean you have to buy a big system with a slew of receivers, et cetera. You just have to make it would be incumbent on us
to do it.
It would make it incumbent upon us to be mindful of those people and accommodate
standards, right? I mean, 15 people out of every 100 people have some sort of hearing loss and could use the assistance. And if it was there and if it was easy to use, I think more people would use it. I think the reason people don't use their systems is because they don't work most of the time, right? So that if they've been installed and then forgotten about over the years and not updated and not upgraded, people won't use the systems that are installed.
It also depends on how many people that have hearing deficiencies actually already have hearing aids. We're in many cases, we're really just addressing the people that have hearing deficiencies that don't have hearing aids, because most churches have a sound system that's making the ambient sound levels high enough that a hearing aid is sufficient to do the rest of the work. To bring this all into the context of the purpose of this panel. We are talking about hybrid ministries. So why are we talking about this technology that's inside the sanctuary? To tie it back to the mission of this panel, the same mix that you're sending to your stream is likely going to be the same mix you're going to send to the listen assist devices. The same sensibilities about what you put in that mix are what you put into hearing assist systems.
And I'm going to also point out that closed captioning for videos is really recommended highly by the UUA. As a matter of fact, they ran a kind of a contest where you could submit your virtual choirs that happened across the course of this year, but they mandated that they must have closed captioning. They must have the scroll at the bottom with the words, which I think it's the way it should be, as it should be. And so I would imagine that the stream that you're sending out also has to have closed captioning in our hybrid worship model.
Yeah, fortunately, services like Zoom and, Zoom and some others include closed captioning.
They're not perfect systems.
They're not perfect, but they're serviceable. And there are higher quality systems, cloud systems that you can subscribe to that work as well. Well, that was
excellent.
That was excellent. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's, as we learn more about what we take for granted, what able-bodied people take for granted and that we can do and what we can experience, and we learn more about those of us who experience life differently, we need to be more sensitive to that. And more accommodating, because there's nothing different about how we want to experience life, right?
Yes, it's the dignity. It's the number one principle, right? Inherent worth and dignity of everybody. You mentioned at the beginning, Marty, about how we've all grown up with rock and roll. Mm-hmm. There's another excellent movie besides Crip Camp that I'll recommend. It's called The Sound of Metal. And it's about a drummer who loses his hearing, and it is quite the film. It's really amazing.
He was nominated for an Academy Award. I can't say that I know whether it won or not, unfortunately. Maybe somebody
It
out
won
there
for Best Sound Design.
Oh, what do you know?
It won for Best Sound Design, as I recall.
For a movie about a deaf person.
Yeah.
Cool.
It was, it's just about, the story of how he's launched into this world of, he thinks his life is over, but it's not.
I would.
There's adaptations, and that's the idea.
Yeah.
We can adapt and we can change and push through. Everybody's got something.
So I've put a number of web links into the show chat channel for people to find. And a lot of these are about advocacy organizations for people with hearing loss. They advocate for the ADA law and other accommodations. They provide information about where to find contractors, where to find hearing loops and other accommodations. So, if you're looking for what movie theater can I go to, here are some good resources to find that information. What else can we say?
Anyone can download that app and check to see if a venue has Listen Everywhere technology. They did say something about sports bars. Nobody
a lot of bars, a lot of sports bars, a lot of music venues are having these things. Playhouses, movie theaters, entertainment centers, all kinds of things. So, one way to kind of experience what it's like not to be able to hear clearly is go into a very popular, very crowded restaurant once that's safe to do so again. Mm-hmm. Maybe you remember what that's like. Been in so many different places, bars and restaurants, where I could not hear a conversation with somebody sitting
Directly across the
right
table.
across the table from me, because there's so much noise in the room. I remember one bar that I went into. It was brand new. There were like 25 people in the place that could hold over 100, well over 100. And those 25 people, not that they were talking real loud, but the acoustics in that room just amplified everybody's speech, that it made it really hard to have a conversation with somebody sitting in the next stool from me. So, that's another aspect of hearing health is, protecting yourself when you're in places with high ambient noise. You can get fairly inexpensive earplugs, sound protecting earplugs. I wear them whenever I go into a show that reduce the sound level by 20 dB, but pretty evenly over the frequency response. So I can hear everything. It just brings the noise level down. So it protects my hearing. And, as a professional sound engineer who is, the age that I am, that's becoming more and more and more important to me, to protect my hearing, not only for my livelihood, but just for my, enjoyment in life. If I can't listen to music, I would just go crazy. So there's all of that. Let's see if there are any questions.
I was just going to say, I've been watching the questions. Going back to Sue Royer, question about Wi-Fi access point for Wi-Fi assisted listening app. Comcast is offering us a second access point for $20 a month. They suggested for guest users, but maybe a good use case is for a Wi-Fi based assisted listening system. We can change the bandwidth allocated to it. Excellent point, Sue. You did ask the question, if someone has a cochlear implant, is one of these options better than the others? I don't have the answer to that.
Cochlear implants is an interesting thing.
That's what the Sound of Metal was about too. He got a cochlear implant.
They did include a cochlear implant. So a cochlear implant has an electronic amplifier that sits on the outside of the ear that activates an internal device that stimulates the eardrum and the auditory nerves. That electronic device has to be compatible with, either has to have a T-coil that's, would be compatible with a hearing loop, or a Wi-Fi receiver in it. So many cochlear implants are compatible, some are not. It depends on the device that you've purchased. Talk to your hearing aid professional. Talk to your audiologist.
And get your hearing
in
checked.
terms of Wi-Fi access points, if it's something that is being offered by your cable company, I would be hesitant. Access points are very easily available from the companies that are selling the Wi-Fi systems. So from Listen Technologies and Williams Sound. And they're also available as third-party systems. But not all access points are created equal. Some are much better than others. And they come in different frequencies, and they need to be programmed. So it's not something that I would recommend for the average user to just get to add on.
And that second access point being offered by Comcast is being directed specifically at giving internet access to people in the building, piggybacked on your service. It's not necessarily being promoted as something as a separate Wi-Fi access point for your own use. You can use it for your own purposes, but they're really aiming at giving guests access to the internet through your connection. So you'd probably be better off getting your own Wi-Fi access point, mounting that rather than using the one from Comcast. And they want $20 a month for it. A Wi-Fi you pay for your own real quick. At $20 a month.
And there's a distinction. There's something to remember. There's a distinction between a Wi-Fi access point and a repeater, which can be sold as an access point, but is not an access point.
Right.
So you got to know what you're getting.
Question from Anders.
You don't want to be renting it.
Question from Anders. We have a terrible interference in our RF hearing assistance system. Do you see a lot of that? And do you have any standard culprits, light dimmers, exit signs? My first reply was, yeah, all of the above can cause that stuff, but there's also a chance that it's just a bad connection between your mixer and the input to the
location of the antenna.
The hearing assistance system. You could be picking up interference in that link. It could be a bad ground. It could be a lifted wire, a high impedance connection. It could be that the interference you're hearing is actually a faithful reproduction of exactly what the hearing assistance system is getting. So I would check not just the hearing assistance system, but make sure that the connection to it is good. One way to do that is disconnect it. Do you still get the interference? Okay, the problem is somewhere past that. It's not the connection between your mixing system and the hearing assistance system if you've disconnected it. So check,
remember that,
split the system in half and figure out which half of the system is the problem.
Right, and remember that an RF system is a radio broadcasting system. It's a radio transmitter, and so the most important part of a transmitter is actually the antenna. The connection between the RF transmitter and the antenna. Now the antenna can be screwed into the top on some transmitters. It can be screwed into the back on some transmitters, or it could be someplace else connected with a wire. So you need to make sure that your antenna system is solid. Make sure that you're using the right kind of antenna, the one that came with the system, or one that is specifically the right antenna. The antenna length has to be fairly specific for the frequency of the transmitter.
There's also firmware updates that come out too, right? Listen
However,
Technologists puts out firmware updates that you should make sure that you've got the latest, up to date
Firmware.
firmware.
Now, that all of that said, I have seen one example of actual real radio interference from another transmitter a couple miles away. So the radio frequency that RF hearing assistance systems work on are either 72 megahertz or 216 megahertz, and they're fairly well protected by the FCC for that purpose, but not exclusively. And in this case, the interference was coming from telemetry equipment from a nearby local airport. And so the remedy was simply to find a better frequency, that a different channel rather, because you can tune them to different radio channels. So we found a better channel, and I had to do a frequency scan using a spectrum analyzer to find one, and that cleared up the problem.
That runs out of questions. And I don't think we have anything else prepared. It's coming up on the 90-minute mark. Do we want to open the mics and turn this into a friendly gathering?
Yeah, we can do that.
If we want to address in the after show, this is so, my question was about the idea of doing an outdoor service using RF technology. And I happen to know that there are some laws surrounding that I don't know if people are aware that they might be breaking by doing that. You cannot set up yourself to turn on your FM radio and broadcast if you're not allowed to do that, which is another argument for using the Wi-Fi system as opposed to, your old drive-in radio.
Most RF-based systems are going to comply with Part 15 of the FCC rules and regulations, so you shouldn't have too many troubles with them because they have a very limited power output. If you were to jump out there and hook up an FM exciter and immediately start pumping 10 watts into the atmosphere, yeah, you're probably going to have some people complaining, especially if you're on an FM radio channel that is interfering with other people's ability to listen to the music or the talk show that they want to hear. You have to comply with Part 15.
Let's establish now that an FM transmitter that's used for parking lot services is a different radio channel, different radio frequency than what's used for hearing assistance systems.
That's right.
Right. That's why I was saying couldn't that be potentially troublesome? Because you have to choose that frequency, don't you?
Yeah, you purchase a so there are certain frequencies in the band that are actually legal for experimental use, and they're at the very high end of the AM channel, AM band, and they would be the same frequencies that if you're driving down the road near an airport and it says, tune to 750 on your AM dial for traffic information. That's the same channels that are available for experimental use.
Is it
However,
very costly?
it's not very costly, especially now during COVID. There are more and more companies that have started manufacturing low-cost FM transmitters that comply with the FCC laws that allow for this type of use on a temporary basis. There are some provisions and some provisos. You cannot use the same frequency that is used by an FCC licensed broadcaster, right? It has to be an open and available channel. And you cannot interfere, your broadcast cannot interfere with any other licensed broadcaster. In addition to that, you cannot transmit, I think it's more than 150 feet, or more than a certain amount of RF power. Now, there's two things about RF power coming from an FM transmitter. One is the amount of power that's actually coming out of the transmitter, but there's the RF energy coming out of the antenna. So you can have a transmitter that is legal, but if your antenna is oversized or has gain in the antenna, your transmission can be illegal. So there's a lot of things, a lot of regulations that go around.
Also the height of the antenna, since FM is fundamentally a line of sight broadcast. You could be perfectly legal at a low altitude, but if you raise the antenna a little bit too high, suddenly you're creating interference in adjacent homes, things like that. So yeah, there's a lot to hooking up an FM system like a drive-in theater, for example. There's a lot of rules about it.
Right.
It can be done, and there's people that will rent the equipment to you if you want to have a parking lot service.
Yeah.
And they'll take care of all the nonsense.
But let me take us back to the Wi-Fi solution, because there are some very interesting ways to use a Wi-Fi hearing assistance system. It is a multi-channel system, and because it can travel over your data network, you can have a centrally located system that can be used in any room in your facility. So you have a sanctuary, you may have a fellowship hall, you may have classrooms. So you could have a Wi-Fi. It's not called a transmitter; it's called an encoder. You can have an encoder for each room. You can have them centrally located in a rack in an equipment space. Doesn't have to be in each room, and they would have different SSIDs and different passwords. And when you go into a room, you open up the app on your phone and you look at a menu. It's a channel menu, just like, your TV channels. You're looking at which channel you want to select to listen to. So you could, find the channel for the room you're in. Or if you're in an overflow room, you can find the channel for the room that you want to hear. Now, we take that outside. We can have a high-powered outdoor Wi-Fi access point that'll give a greater range. Okay, so it can cover a fairly huge parking lot with one access point, and no problems with FCC liabilities. People will be able to tune them in on their phone. People can Bluetooth their phone to their car's stereo system, and it works out great.
Yeah, I use my phone. I hear my phone through my car speakers. So, it's excellent sound.
Right.
Time to open the mics.
Yep.
So let me,
Which means time to stop the recording.
Yeah, let me close out the show. So I'd like to thank our panelists for such a beautiful conversation today. This is part of our mission. This is what we do, and why we're here is to help us not only work through the technology, but how to apply the technology and why to apply the technology, because technology by itself does nothing for us. All of the benefit is in how we use it, right? So that's what we're here to do, is to have these discussions about how we can use all this technology to serve our congregations, to serve our communities, and to help us. So watch the Discord for upcoming shows and announcements, links to the past show recordings. By the way, a lot of the recordings are available on our YouTube channel, except for the latest 3 are always reserved for people who are registered on the Discord and on Zoom. You can find the links to those recordings in Discord so that you can watch them, and only you can watch them for at least a couple of weeks. It's a benefit of membership. So, here we go. This is brand new stuff that we're all working through, equipping our sanctuaries, equipping our facilities, upgrading our technologies to the 21st and a half century, when many of our technologies have been, stuck in the 19th century. So these are golden opportunities to get this done. And good luck, and we'll see you next week on the Hybrid Ministries Tech Forum.